Sage Wonder coming at you from my van down by the river. Okay, so I thought I would share my story today of how and why and under what circumstances I left the ministry. If you know my storyline, my history, and a lot of you do, you've been listening to my channel for a while, you know I was raised by an ex-Marine turned Pentecostal preacher. Well, former Marine. There are no ex-Marines, only former Marines. Once a Marine, always a Marine. I can attest to that. So I was raised by this Marine Corps drill instructor / Pentecostal preacher. And we were traveling musicians, preachers, traveling evangelists. My dad also started churches. He was a pioneer pastor, and he either did one or the other. And we never stayed put much because we were either traveling in the field, which is a church talk for on the road, and or we were starting churches, getting them up and running in 6 months to a year, and then turning them over to people that would operate them. And so my old man probably started 15, 16 churches, many of which are still functioning here in the Pacific Northwest and specifically in Oregon and along the coast. So at any rate, raised in the church, was given a full boat scholarship at the age of 16 when I graduated high school early. And all I had to do was just play for their traveling band, their ensemble, their vocal group. They needed a accompanist for their vocal group. And this West Coast Bible College traveled, their vocal group traveled all over the United States and the globe, just singing. And they would have given me a personal tutor. They were paying for everything, my clothes, my food, my lodging. I wouldn't have to spend a dime. It wouldn't cost my family a dime. But I knew the truth that that school was not really a school at all, but a factory that turned out preachers. And that the women that went to that school weren't serious students. They were there to find a husband and turn him into a preacher. And I didn't want to be a preacher. I was running from the calling, and I didn't want to. So I immediately left home at 16. The first time I left at 15, but I came back, finished school, and before I ran away for good at 16. And by the time I was 17, I was on a truck on my way to Texas. So I lived and worked as a musician, and I gave up. I walked away from the ministry until after I did not sell my soul to the devil, and my career as a musician was sabotaged by the music business. And after, I guess, being a kind of militia type and a prepper for a while, I ended up coming to terms with God in a real way, and finally answering the calling and going into the ministry. A lot of you that have heard my storyline know that I was a music minister, assistant pastor, then a pastor of my own church, and that I shut my church down once I was confronted by a demon-possessed witch that I did not know how to deal with, and I did not have the tools to deal with her, and she scared me to death, and I didn't think anybody in the pastorate, in the pulpit, should be scared of a demon-possessed witch, so I left to get more education, and it landed me in a devil-fighting church that's kind of notorious in Texas for a lot of different reasons. And that I worked with them through their strongest point. And I started working there as a youth pastor with three kids, 3 little kids, teenagers in my youth group. And I built that youth group to where on any given Wednesday night, there was 150 kids there, and that I could raise up 500 kids from the region for a special event. Kind of like churches that may have a bunch of people as members, but only certain people come every Sunday. But if you have a special event like Easter or Thanksgiving, Easter or Christmas or something, then you have a big turnout. And that's kind of the numbers on my youth group. Then I was promoted to regional youth director, and I was given a second church youth group in a neighboring town. So I was over 2 youth groups, and I was also over the youth groups in 3 states. So I had youth pastors under me, and I had 2 youth groups of my own. How did I do that? I just like this super. I did it by delegating. I did it by training up people to do the jobs for me. And because you can only be in one place at a time unless you clone yourself. So I set out to spiritually clone myself until eventually I was just a administrator. I did my job so well that really I hardly ever interacted with the kids anymore except from the pulpit. And really all I did was just deal with my associate pastors that were under me and all of my volunteer leaders. And so really I was just making a whole lot of executive decisions and putting forth programs and organizing things and handling money and raising money. That I raised $25,000 in one day once with a community-wide golf tournament. Really, it was a whole year in the process, but the money came in one day for a one-day event. So I was really clipping along and being quite effective when I got sidetracked on an issue. One of the girls that had been there from day one, one of the young girls in my group, her parents were deacons, a deacon and a deaconess in the church. And they split up. They had a major divorce. And I felt like watching it from the outside and also having some inside information through the bishop that what was really going on is that the woman had decided she didn't love this guy anymore, that she'd married an older man when she was young and she thought it was cool, and now that he was getting older, she was being tempted by younger men. And she just didn't want to be in the relationship anymore. She just wanted to go out and party and chase young boys, young men. And I felt like that he was desperately trying to save the marriage and their family, and she just didn't really care. And the whole thing was just really tragic. Now, I stayed out of it because that was not my area of ministry, but ministering to their daughter was. And I saw what at one time was a vibrant, young, beautiful girl that was she was the joy of our youth group. Like, she would walk in the room and everyone would smile. I mean, she could make the whole group laugh. And during this divorce, when this thing went down, she completely withdrew. She stopped talking to everyone. She started dressing in black. She started wearing white makeup and black goth makeup, with a white base and the black fingernails, and staying to herself in a corner and being on the phone all the time and not wanting to come to church. And I was concerned that she was suicidal. She was getting so dark so fast. And of course, at my leadership staff meeting, it came up. And they said, what do you think about this? Because they were concerned that, when you look in the Bible, it says you can't get divorced. And if you get divorced, you can't get remarried. And so my leadership wanted some clarification on this because they were viewing the same tragedy I was. And so I was a guy that had only been married once for over 20 years at that point in my life. I was involved in an organization. I was about third down the line in an organization where the top 3 or 4 of us had never, in that organization, were guys that had been married for decades and never been remarried, never been divorced. And when this came up, I gave my opinion of divorce. God hates divorce because of the violence. Let me say that again. God hates divorce because of the violence. What does that mean? Well, just look at the little girl, how violently it tore her life apart, how violently this was tearing this family apart. And, so they asked me specific questions. Is divorce allowed in the Bible? And I didn't make an opinion one way or the other. I just read the many, many texts where Jesus says if you divorce your wife and marry another, you're committing adultery. Now, let me say that I've got 2 divorces and 3 marriages under my belt now after this. And it's funny how when you judge someone, oftentimes the things you judge them for come to visit you. And they become more real for you so that you can have compassion. This is kind of the way I think God works with people that judge other people. This is why you shouldn't judge. Because if you judge them, the same kind of situation they are in will be visited to you so that you can see how you would handle it. Wow. God is not always all just happy, happy, joy, joy. Sometimes serving God is a hard lesson. But at any rate, I simply read what Jesus wrote in the Bible, and I did not clarify. I told them, look, I want divorced people to feel forgiven. I want multiple marriages to be okay, because our church is full of them, and people everywhere have these problems and these issues. And I can't find the mercy in the scripture. And so this somehow got back to one of my equals, another elder, another ordained minister in the church. And him and his wife were both on second marriages. And they had one child together and two children from her previous marriage. And so when it got back to them, what I had said in my youth leadership meeting, just with my leaders, they got very offended at this, and they began to covertly work against me. Now, I should have put this at the front, but I'm going to make this statement like it or not. Be careful when you attack a man of God. Recently, a person came on to one of my videos and left a message saying that they hoped I got cancer. And I replied back, I am protected by God, and people that curse me and people that wish bad things to happen to me or attack me in any way, even verbally, often have tragedy befall them. So I'm putting that out there now, and I could tell you many stories. They're sad stories of people who have attacked me and then bad things have just happened to them. I'm not threatening someone and saying I'm doing it. It's just God protects men of God, people that He's chosen. He protects them. He jealously protects them. And you guys should all keep that in mind. All of us should keep that in mind. I'm very careful not to criticize preachers. And if I do, I try to do it with love and from the Word. But I definitely don't wish bad things upon anyone, especially men of God. So, having said that, this couple who was very offended by my statements began to work behind the scenes to undo me. And they began to call for a vote to have me removed without me even knowing what was going on. And I was called in by the bishop. He said, let me teach you about, how we believe that clergy. And I specifically, I said, look, God might be able to forgive you for marriage and divorce, but you can't be in the ministry because of this verse and that verse. And you'll find them there as well. And maybe I'll do another video on how I no longer believe that. And part of it was having lived through 2 divorces and 2 attempts at making a marriage work that was broken. And understanding that, God's grace is sufficient. And I no longer live by that dogma. And it was this process that led me through it. But these people did not need to attack me and destroy my ministry for me to learn that lesson. For me to come to that conclusion doctrinally did not require them to destroy me the way that they did. And by the time I was aware of it, most everyone in the church who was not under 25 was calling for my head on a platter. And I don't to this day know how they turned people against me in such a major way based on a rumor. Like, I never spoke again to anyone but the bishop about my feelings about divorce and remarriage in that organization. But by the time I became aware of what was going on, my choice was to challenge them to open debate per the laws of the bylaws of that organization. I had the right as clergy to have trial. Try me and defrock me, but I'm not stepping down. Or I could just step down and walk away. And I guess I was getting a bit burned out. By then I was essentially just an executive pastor. A lot of the thrill of ministry was gone, and I was really just a facilitator, a manager, an organizer, and a money guy, a guy raising funds. And so I walked away. I walked away from the ministry. I walked away from that job, and I thought just from that job, but the whole thing left me bitter and angry. I was treated very badly in that organization for standing up for what everyone would have considered an orthodox opinion. And I've changed my opinion. Don't jump up in my face. Grace is good enough for me. It's good enough for you. Grace is sufficient for me, and all of this stuff is under grace. And I won't, now there's going to be this big debate as to whether you can be divorced and remarried and be in the clergy. Well, okay, I have a riddle for you. I've been divorced twice. Wait, I've been married 3 times, but I've only had 2 wives. Think about that. The girl's so nice, I married her twice. So I got back with my first wife after all of that. But I had a marriage in the middle that didn't work out. Lasted all of 3 months. It's a long, strange trip. But let me tell you what happened to these people that attacked me and drummed me out of the ministry. That drove me out, that made it their life's goal to attack me based on something I said to someone else that they heard about. And right after I left that organization, the woman involved, who was particularly ugly to me and particularly ugly to my family and my wife, and was particularly hateful in the way that she dealt with me. And it's really ironic and sad, since I saved her kid from the honky-tonk. Like, her kid was already down that road and was neck deep in bar life. He was a musician. He was on the road. And I loved him. And I mentored him out of the bar and into the church and into the praise and worship team. And this kid, this is the success story of all this. This kid, her kid, the kid that I mentored, went on to be a pastor, a praise and worship minister first, and then a pastor of a church. And, who knows what that guy's life would have been like if he continued down that road. But she came to me and begged me to save her son, and so I went into the bar and got him. I went and saw his band play. I hung out and drank Diet Coke and watched them play. And I hung out in that environment because I'm not afraid of it. Literally pulled him back into the church for her. And she paid me back by drumming me out of the business, by drumming me out of the church, rather, and drumming me out of the that organization and destroying years of work that I'd put together. And so what happened right after I left? She pretty much dropped dead one day from a brain aneurysm. Yeah, something in her head popped. She languished in the hospital for months, brain dead, being kept alive by machines. Destroyed her preacher husband. He was very tore up about all of it, obviously. The whole family, it hit them so hard. And he, who was very much a holier-than-thou attitude guy who attacked me for having the audacity to say anything he didn't agree with, he was particularly ugly, pushed on mainly by her, who I think had a Jezebel spirit. But this woman laid there and languished in the hospital for months, and the bills racked up. And the church had numerous offerings to help them, and they raised about $30,000 to pay for her medical bills. Great, right? Except they gave him the money. He ran off with his secretary from work, and they went on a cross-country binge and blew that $30,000 while his wife lay dying in the hospital. And then you think it wouldn't even end with a happy ending for him, because when his wife died, he married the secretary who took him for everything he owned and left him for a younger man. Both their lives were destroyed. And I feel like it's because they attacked a man of God. These are the details of how I left the ministry. How I would go on to understand grace to such a point that I felt okay leaving and going back to the bars and playing music, because I felt like I was completely under grace, that grace is good enough for everything and all of us. And that I got to the point where I almost didn't believe in sin at all, because grace abounds. But I was heavily in the dogma of the Pentecostal church when it came to divorce and remarriage at that time. And I learned that lesson a very hard way. I learned that doctrine I learned grace by being forced to lean on grace. I think that's how we all learn grace. That's how, when you really get it, is when you have to have it. When it's for you. It's easy to deny other people grace, but when it's for you, you need it. You believe in it, let me tell you, and you thank God it's there. I didn't want those bad things to happen to them. But you better be careful when you attack a man of God. You better be extra careful when you attack me, because there's a long list of people that have attacked me and things have not gone well for them, because I am under God's protection. This is why I stopped being afraid of Antifa. God protects me. All right. Till next time, thanks for listening.